Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the Vince McMahon docuseries on Netflix. This 6-part series features episodes that run for about an hour each, totaling 6 hours of compelling content. For this review, I'll be taking a podcast-style approach, so feel free to play the episode as we go along. I hope you enjoy this in-depth look at the docuseries, and I'll be discussing it even further during my live stream tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Warning: this docuseries will mention abuse, sexual assault, drug use, and more. Please be advised.
So in the beginning episode, like the first 5 minutes of the episode 3 entitled The Screwjob, what you're hearing is the initial story is about Wendy Richter not wanting to drop her title. So Vince screwed her. He told the referee once her shoulders get pinned to the mat, count 1, 2, 3, either way, whether she kicks out or not, and she needs to drop that title. She doesn't want to drop it. She needs to drop it. Wendy fought as hard as she could, and even when it got to the end, she ended up getting screwed. Vince was like, I already told you what you had to do. He was like, I didn't care. I told her what she had to do. She didn't want to comply, so I had to make some decisions to make her lose the title. Wendy was embarrassed. She was upset. And so that night, she walked out of WWE never to return until she got, inducted into the Hall of Fame. I mean, to a certain extent, I don't blame her. But at the same time, it's like, okay, this is professional wrestling. At some point, you do have to drop the title. Like, you're not going to be champion forever. Right? So you can't hoard the title because you don't want to drop it. You know what I'm saying? It's just shit like that I didn't really like from the wrestlers, but I can understand why a lot of them wanted to keep the title or, drop it to somebody worthwhile. I can understand those sentiments. But it doubles back to the trial into which Hulk Hogan was testifying. And when you see that he basically double-crossed the government, these fools gave him the immunity before he testified, which was stupid. That was dumb as hell. I would have gave him immunity after he testified. Once I hear your testimony, then I can assess whether you deserve immunity or not. But the damn government was going to put him in jail for 17 years. They had the upper hand. So why would you have him sign the papers of immunity? Before the man testifies, he would not even tell you what he was going to say. He got in court and screwed the damn prosecutors over. Didn't say a damn thing disparaging about Vince McMahon. But to his credit, all of the wrestlers, even those who had issues with Vince, have said that he did not force them to take steroids or suggest that they take them. These wrestlers were already taking steroids before they got there. So it wasn't a situation of, Vince McMahon was peddling steroids. This was Dr. Zahorian peddling these steroids on his own, and the wrestlers was partaking in the free pharmacist that was hanging around the locker room. Okay, that had to be there due to the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission. Okay, this was not like Vince hired the doctor and then was telling the doctor to facilitate these steroids and painkillers out to his wrestlers. That wasn't the case. So in this instance, Vince might be cleared. Bret Hart said he never heard Vince tell anybody to take steroids, but you hear guys like Dave Meltzer say it was heavily implied when he says you need to work out more so you can bulk up. But these wrestlers were taking steroids before they ever got into the WWE or started working with Vince. So I don't know about that. I really don't. I don't really... Yeah, I'm gonna say that that's a gray area. Is it possible that Vince is innocent when it comes to the steroid case? Yes. Is it possible that Vince could have implied that they need to take steroids? Yes, that is possible. Do I think that that's true? No, because I feel like these guys were already taking steroids. They were already taking it. So he didn't have to imply anything. He ain't really have to say nothing. But he did book the guys who looked bigger and bulkier and had that massive, muscular physique. And if you notice, you go back to the beginning of the documentary, he makes it very clear that he liked the muscular physique. He was very enamored by that, in terms of he admired the dedication that it took for them to get there. So of course he would like a bigger, beefier man on TV rather than having a scrawny little man wrestling on TV. It's about to be a wild, bumpy ride, but it seemed Hulk Hogan remained loyal to Vince McMahon all the way to the end, despite the fact that he went to go work for his op, and despite the fact that he accepted immunity, thinking that he was gonna go out there and tell on him, and ultimately the man ended up screwing over the feds. That was just dumb. Government, you was stupid. It was stupid. You first should have got his statements. And then you could have cross-examined him and been like, when we got your statement about what had happened, you said this. So did you lie to the government when you said this? Were you lying? Are you perjuring yourself on the stand right now? See, this is how you know the prosecutors, they weren't thinking. They weren't thinking, baby. Vince ended up winning his case. He was found not guilty. And then there was a period of time where WWE struggled. They struggled because the negative press they received and everything that was happening to them throughout this trial, it really hurt business. Executives left, fans stopped showing up. It was a very, very trying time for WWF. But then they had to revamp and go in a different direction. And they tried to stick through to the formula of finding an all-American hero like Hulk Hogan. And they tried to do it with Lex Luger. But Lex Luger couldn't connect with the audience the way that Hulk Hogan did. But even Hulk Hogan was losing the audience in his own heyday. So that was stupid. I'm just going to be honest with you. That was dumb, because you weren't thinking outside the box. You were thinking, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it was broken. So now you go into a whole new direction, right? You're bringing in guys like Shawn Michaels. You're bringing in guys like Razor Ramon. You're bringing in guys like The Undertaker. You're bringing in guys like Bret Hart. These were what they called the new generation of WWE. And this ushered in a new era of wrestling. And this was about to be the pivotal change in where WWF would go in terms of pop culture. And it's literally being ingrained into American and global pop culture. This was the start of the new WWF, and where Monday Night Raw became Raw is War some years later. But even with the new generation, there was still some lingering issues. Like I said before, Ted Turner was looming over Vince's head, and he made it very clear that he was not gonna just go away. Like I said, you cannot leave a trail of bodies and not expect one of them bones to be picked up. In Vince's case, he had no problem destroying the territories the way that he did by stealing their top talent and creating his wrestling empire. And Ted Turner took his formula, improved on it, and did the same thing right back to him. Poached his wrestlers, took some of his top guys and some of the top guys from the other territories, like Ric Flair. Ric Flair was the king of NWA at one point. King of wrestling. You know, Ric Flair was the top guy. He was the guy, right? Ric Flair is over in WCW living his best life, as is everybody else. And once Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage show up, that puts WCW in a space where they actually have a chance to compete against Vince McMahon. So Ted Turner sat down with Bischoff and said, okay, Bischoff, listen, what do we need to do to be able to compete successfully against Vince? Bischoff's like, look, we're coming on Saturdays at 6:05 p.m., 3 Pacific. Like, there's no way we're competing with Vince. And he was like, all right, bet. So, looked over at the head of TNT and was like, give Eric Bischoff 2 hours every Monday. Eric Bischoff said, what? That's how WCW's Monday Night Nitro was born. And now Vince McMahon is sitting there like, oh, god damn. They done stole my damn talent. They done created a whole new goddamn... They got a whole new show. They competing directly with me. They gonna murder my business. They finna take me down. But given the fact that Vince McMahon ain't no quitter, he wasn't going nowhere. Plus, there was something brewing in WWE. It just needed to be coaxed out with the right person. And while Bret Hart was an amazing superstar and everybody loves Bret Hart, he was the leader of the new school. There were other people within that new school who just had more charisma, the sex appeal, the drive, and they just were able to be the it factor that was needed to bump WWE where they needed to be. Let's take a gander at who that guy might have been. Or guys. Because I can tell you right now, and this is no slander towards Bret Hart, but Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, all these guys, they oozed charisma. They had an it factor about them. They were the kind of guys that when they walked into a room, you noticed them. But Bret Hart was just that regular type of dude until he put that uniform on and got in that ring, and there were very few people who could fuck with him. I'm not saying that Bret Hart wasn't a superstar. I just think that Bret Hart didn't have that... He didn't have the entertainment it factor of being a superstar, but he did have the skill and the talent to be one. What Eric Bischoff was able to accomplish with WCW was nothing short than a masterclass of a late mover expectation. So if you're ever in business and you want to know what a first mover would be, I guess you can consider Vince McMahon a first mover. He was somebody who created an opportunity out of a situation and was able to change an industry based off of his own ideals. What happened with Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff is a late mover advantage. They watched Vince McMahon and everything that he did, and then they took it and reshaped what WWE, or rather what WCW should be compared to the competitor's product. They knew that WWE was not sufficing when it came to their talent and when it came to their fans. Their stories were old and outdated and cartoonish, and they were just not appealing to the older set of fans that were between that demo of 18 and 35. So Eric Bischoff created a new niche for professional wrestling, one that is still followed to this day. Right now, you can see where WWE and AEW both fight for that demo of 18 to 35, sometimes 18 to 45, depending on the day. But they fight for that demo because it's a young male audience, and that's what they're clamoring for. WWE was more family oriented, so they weren't clamoring for that young adult audience, but they are now. And they both are trying to do more realistic stories that make more sense to adults rather than just appealing to kids and occasionally appealing to adults. In this case, Eric Bischoff understood the playbook. He realized that he wasn't going to be able to match Vince McMahon bar for bar. So he walked around him and went in a totally different direction and was able to not only amplify WCW, but change the way professional wrestling was viewed, presented, and ultimately how everybody really perceived it. He was able to create the new niche of professional wrestling. The soap opera telling of stories that actually made sense, that appealed more to the realism of what was happening in adults' lives. It was an ingenious play, and it was highly smart because Eric Bischoff knew he couldn't compete with Vince on his level, so he went above and over his head. But as always, in a late mover advantage, you too show your cards. And later on down the line, you'll begin to see how Vince McMahon evolves and starts to take back the territory that he created. It's a very interesting time. And the biggest thing that WCW was doing is that he picked apart Vince McMahon's entire operation. The superstars wanted to make more money. Ted Turner provided the money. They wanted less time. He provided them less time. He wanted to make sure he had a predictability, an unpredictability factor. He had that. And then he was able to do live television instead of doing taped television, which is a whole different ballgame because it adds to the unpredictability, and also it allows for you to make changes on the spot to the scripts of what you're presenting in terms of the storyline. And like I said before, a late mover advantage is great for the late mover, but it is also a great way to showcase your cards to your competition. Now, Eric Bischoff was hella smart because not only did he go live, but he would reveal the finishes for their matches because it was taped. So he knew it. So he would reveal the finishes for their matches, and that hurt their programming. And it made WWE look really foolish compared to WCW. And Eric Bischoff was ruthless. He would do this on live TV every single week. And he admitted that he did it to incite the audience of the WWE universe because he wanted them to tune in to see what dastardly thing he was going to do next. He didn't care when he got the eyes or how he got the eyes. All Eric Bischoff cared about was that he got the eyes. But when you operate under this type of do dirty behavior, it's always going to come back on you on the back end. Now, don't get me wrong, Vince McMahon isn't perfect, but he wasn't this ruthless. However, the Vince McMahon character hadn't been born yet. But when he does emerge, child. So in the documentary, what it goes to is that Vince and them start to hit back at Bischoff. Bischoff is egging on the WWE, and Vince's biggest thing was to never sell, never let them see you sweat, never let them see that you're getting under their skin. But he did, with all the things he did. So they started making parodies of Ted Turner and the wrestlers over in WCW, Hulk Hogan, Randy, everybody. And the owner of USA Network didn't like it because her and Ted Turner were friends. And she was just like, we're friends, we're professional colleagues, and we have a friendly competition. We're friendly competitors. I'm like, girl, this man is burying you in your own programming and you're worried about your friendship? Bitch. Vince was like, okay, fuck it, shut it down. But Ted Turner was laughing at the shit like it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, they poached 2 more people because not only did they have Macho Man Randy Savage, Lex Luger, and of course the Hulk, Hulk, they also got Alundra Blaze, I believe it is, who threw her championship in the trash on national TV. This was a storyline that was also created by Bischoff. Now, afterwards, they were, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were both offered better contracts, better money, and better time so that they could perform and still be able to be with their families. And this was a personal decision. It wasn't a decision to spite Vince. It was a business decision because Vince could not afford to pay them what Ted Turner was offering to pay them. And he wasn't offering them the time that Ted Turner was offering them. So Scott Hall and Kevin Nash both left. Now, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, they were all very close friends. And they were sad that their friend, both of their friends, were leaving. They were happy for them professionally, but they were a little hurt by the fact that their friends were leaving. And they were, for whatever reason, they were dubbed the Clique because they were very close. They were very good friends. They hung around each other often. And this was a well-kept secret backstage, but it somehow floated into fan territory, and they found out and they knew. There's an infamous segment of a New York Madison Square Garden wrestling match. It was a live house show. Shawn Michaels had a match with Kevin Nash, and they were in a cage match. And this incident led to a lot of drama, but the reality is Shawn Michaels asked to do a small tribute to them. This wasn't on live TV, so there was nothing that, they had to worry about. There was nobody recording in terms of the venue or WWE in terms of recording the event to stream it or to keep it live. They may have recorded it for the archive, but that's about it. So nobody would have known, and this wasn't not like it was now in this day and age where shit easily can get out because fans don't care. They want that traction and shit online, right? So Shawn Michaels came up with this idea to do a tribute to his friends that were leaving, and Vince McMahon agreed that they could do something. So what happened essentially was they did a curtain call. They let people in to the kayfabe of wrestling, which had already been defeated well before they did this. A lot of people were already in on the game that wrestling was a choreographed sport. It was wrestling entertainment by far, and they had already let people into that world without letting them into that world. You already were aware of that, and if you weren't, then it kind of got spoiled with this. But there was a cardinal rule that you just didn't break kayfabe like that, and they broke kayfabe by holding up their rivals' hands after the match was over. All four of them were in the ring together. They held up each other's hands, they hugged, and it was a big old to-do. And of course, this was not good when it came to the OGs of wrestling or those who respected kayfabe. The Undertaker wasn't a big fan, and Bret Hart says they killed wrestling that day, which I think is a bit overdramatic, but sure, go off, sis. So because of the fallout of the wrestlers in the back that wanted to keep the Carney days going, and because Scott Hall and Razor Ramon, Scott Hall was gone, Kevin Nash was gone, Shawn Michaels was champion, couldn't punish your champ, the person who ended up having to take the brunt of the punishment for this curtain call was Triple H. Triple H ended up losing the opportunity to win the King of the Ring tournament, and he was punished for a little while for this particular situation, despite the fact that Vince McMahon agreed to allow them to do something for their friends that were leaving. And their point, Shawn Michaels and Triple H's point, was the curtain had already been pulled back on wrestling. There are dirt sheets that are out that are spilling the beans on everything. People are talking to them, telling them things. Kayfabe was already dying before we did any of this. And he says by far the biggest reaction you got from that show was us showing our friends love and sending them on their way to the other company. And he was like, Vince, at some point we've got to change. We've got to change. The world is changing and we've got to change with it. And Vince was like, yeah, but not right now. And essentially what he told Triple H was that he was going to have to eat shit and learn to like the taste of it. So instead of you taking responsibility for what you allowed them to do and you taking accountability too, you decided to place all the blame onto Triple H's head. When Triple H is the one who requested to do this, it was Shawn Michaels. But you couldn't screw over your golden boy. Now that's fucked up. You know what's funny is Vince McMahon is sitting there and he sued. He ended up suing once the Outsiders debuted in WCW. He didn't like the fact that they showed up in the intellectual property of Razor Ramon they didn't present themselves as Razor Ramon, but he had the aesthetic of it. And that's what he was suing over. And he said, you're stealing. And it's not good business to steal. Vinny, my boy. That's what you did. That's what you did with the territories, or did you forget? You said you didn't care because it was business. It's not personal. Honey, it's not personal. It's just business. It's just business, babes. It's not personal. But it ain't no fun when to grab it When the rabbit got the gun. Chitty chitty bang bang, nigga. Vince McMahon is a very complex creature. He likes to control the narrative. He enjoys being in control of what people think. So he likes to present a particular story as to what he believes and feels, but that may not necessarily be the truth. He's a master manipulator in that sense. And it's not narcissism, it is pure manipulation. He felt as though Ted Turner was coming after him directly. He did think that he was trying to compete, which he definitely did. He didn't necessarily think that him taking his talent was a bad thing because he himself did the same thing, but he did feel, or at least he made it seem as though Ted Turner's efforts were targeted towards him. So he had to present a front of Ted Turner is the big bad wolf that came after me, the small owned family business. He's a multi-billionaire. He only came after me because, you know, he couldn't do it on his own. So he came after me and took my talent from me. When, like I said, he did the exact same thing to the territories. But Vince is like, I did that to embolden my company and make my company better for me and for my family. I didn't do it because I had any hatred or malice towards the territories, but it seems like Ted Turner's is directly targeted towards me. But then he contradicts himself and he says, well, it can seem a little hypocritical, but the things that I say isn't exactly how I feel. But you have to be able to control the thought process. Essentially, what he's saying is, you don't need to know how I feel. The only thing that you need to understand is that I didn't like what he did. And I felt like I had to present the front that this was a big, bad, money-hungry monster coming after me. Little old me. Simple and plain. Once the Outsiders had their debut match and Hulk Hogan was revealed to be their partner, that is when the true seismic shift of wrestling really began. And when Vince really was sitting there and was just like, all right, let's play. Because not only was Hulk Hogan cutting a promo on everybody and talking about the Outsiders, he also was cutting a promo on the competition, which was something that never had been done before. Most people worked in their companies, did their job. They didn't speak on the other companies. So him doing that, as well as the other things that Bischoff and everybody else had been doing for quite some time, really, really led to a point where WWE had to either shit or get off the pot. And boy, did they shit. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting in the third episode. Bret Hart was offered a 20-year contract to stay with WWE. He stayed. He signed it. He stayed. But Vince later realized that the contract was unnecessary. He was like, I'm not going to be able to afford to keep you, Bret. So in the contract, Vince showed him the loopholes of his contract per Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon. He showed him the loopholes and said, look, go to WCW and see what they can offer you. WCW offered him a better contract and more money. And Bret went. According to Shane and to Vince, all he wanted for Bret Hart was to drop the title to the next talent because he was leaving. He wasn't staying, and he was WWF champion at the time. He wasn't staying with the company, so there was no need for him to leave with the title. Bret didn't want to do that. The reason why Bret Hart didn't want to drop the title was solely based off of the fact that the title was being dropped to Shawn Michaels. He didn't like Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels was a fucking prick. Even he admitted it. And so he was like, I'm not dropping this fucking championship to him. I'll drop it to anybody but him. Anybody. But I'm not dropping it to him. Bret didn't want to do that. Bret was done. He was like, we're not going this route. I'm not dropping it to this asshole. That's not happening. So instead of, them going with the original finish, which was Bret Hart losing clean to Shawn Michaels, they decided to go with what they told him, which was a smosh finish. Smosh finish was basically the match gets thrown out. It ends in like a disqualification or no contest. And a bunch of guys come out and they're all fighting, and the brawl, it ends on a big brawl. That's a smosh finish. At least that's what Bret Hart thought it was going to be. But see, prior to that, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Vince McMahon were on a phone call together, and he was like, listen, Bret doesn't want to drop the title to him. And Triple H was like, fuck that. Make him do it. Do it for him. I mean, not too long ago, you did it to Wendy Richter, so I don't understand why you had such a problem with doing it to Bret Hart. However, they were in Montreal at the time. It's messy. This whole thing is just messy boots. Well, eventually, during this match with Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, instead of going with the smosh finish, Vince decided to go with the Screwjob finish. He knew that they were going to be putting Bret into the sharpshooter. Bret never tapped, but they had to force the timekeeper to ring the bell. The only people that knew that this was going to happen was Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and, of course, Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon essentially swore Shawn Michaels and Triple H to secrecy, that they would never tell a soul, and that everything was on Vince, that they weren't a part of that. But because Shawn Michaels won the title the way that he did, he immediately knew that Shawn was in on the game. His wife and everybody that was in Montreal, of course, was pissed. And Vince McMahon was regarded as one of the most horrible people in the world in Montreal for years. There's some footage of them being backstage. And I mean, Bret Hart spitting in Mr. McMahon's face was real. Him going absolute nutso on everything was real. Everybody in the back was pissed. They didn't like the way it went down in the finish. Some people probably not going to like this. But let's play devil's advocate. In the end, Bret Hart was leaving WWE. Whether he won that match, lost that match, it didn't matter. He was leaving WWE. Now, don't get me wrong. He was in Montreal and he shouldn't have gotten screwed over that way. But at the same time, he was making it very difficult for them to do what they needed to do in order to move forward from him. And I didn't understand why it meant so much for you not to lose this title to Shawn Michaels. You don't have to like him. Professionally, you had a job. And you should have did your job. I understood you bled and did everything for 14 years. You were a part of the business. And I respect that. But you also need to uphold a certain level of professionalism. Even though Shawn Michaels was poking the bear, he was shooting on you every 2 seconds, and you maintained the kayfabe and stuck in the script. That was your choice. Had it been me, once he go low, I go to hell. But you decided to keep yourself on the up and narrow, and you wanted to go high and didn't go low where Shawn Michaels went. But at the same time, you didn't maintain your professionalism and just leave the company on a good note. You had already gotten Vince's blessing to leave. He helped you get out of your own fucking contract that you signed, and all you had to do was drop the goddamn title to Shawn. You wouldn't have had this. You wouldn't have had all this bullshit going on with the secrecy, you punching Vince in the face, spitting on him, and acting like a child in the middle of everywhere, all because of a title that you didn't own, you didn't win on your own, you were given this opportunity, and then on top of that, you ended up taking your ass to WCW where you didn't even perform at the level that you could have or should have. And it just goes to prove that even in leaving you to your own devices, you were not the character that you had been portrayed as in WWE. You didn't have the protection of the E to be able to rebuild yourself back up over in WCW. You just didn't have it. Plus, it was a totally different audience over there that wasn't looking for your bubblegum pop, cookie cutter style wrestling persona. They didn't want that. They wanted something edgy and gritty. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not advocating for Vince McMahon's decision to screw over Bret Hart. In fact, I believe it's quite the opposite. I feel like Vince could have done this in a different way. I feel like he could have just simply stripped Bret of the title after the match was over, and they could have introduced this new Mr. McMahon character right then and there. And they could have brought Bret Hart in on this, let him have his curtain call moment once the cameras were shut down and everything be right as rain. But he was so busy doing what he wanted to do, he wasn't thinking clearly. You feel me? Life is about choices at the end of the day. And while Vince doesn't regret any of his choices, I feel like he could have made better decisions. There were better ways to go about this. You saw the way Eric Bischoff was owning your ass for 83 weeks. At bare minimum, you could have reinvented the WWE out of this particular moment and used this as the cusp to start rebranding what WWE is and was. The screw job was just unnecessary. It was an unnecessary, idiotic way to take that title off of Bret. And if you wanted it to be all about you and be on you, then why did you have this discussion with Shawn and with Triple H, forcing them to take the brunt of your bullshit? You didn't have to do that. You could have just made the decision and let him beat Shawn Michaels and then Shawn Michaels beat up Bret Hart and take the title from him. You could have did it that way. And then you could have the title vacated because Bret Hart was injured and he's gone. Then he pops up over in WCW. There was all kinds of ways to do this story, but you chose to do it this way. And I just feel like it was an unnecessary way. You created unnecessary bullshit and emboldened a wrestler to hit his boss over something that could have been simply resolved with you pivoting in the situation rather than going with your gut. Because oftentimes your gut is treacherous and it is not always the best decision. It's just foolish. It's just foolish.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more wrestling content. Check out our merch and consider becoming a member for exclusive perks, special emojis, and members-only content.